For poor people in one of the world's fastest growing megacities, development means displacement and violence.
We are homeless now. Nowhere to stay. Nowhere to sleep.
On The Sunday Story, the human cost of building Lagos, Nigeria into the Dubai of Africa. Listen now to The Sunday Story from the Up First podcast on the NPR app.
Would you describe yourself as high agency?
Yes, in some areas of my life, and no, not at all in others.
I don't know if I'm high agency, but I caught myself the other day almost telling my 5-year-old he needed to be more agentic, and I really had to check myself and think about whether that was the kind of parenting I wanted to do.
5 could be early to introduce the idea.
I think even if you really believe in the idea of agency, you're pretty low agency at 5.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In case you haven't heard, being a quote-unquote high agency person is becoming kind of a thing. Sophie, Max, in like a sentence, what does being high agency mean? Like, what are the traits of a high agency person?
I think it implies decisiveness, self-assuredness, a willingness to take risks, and basically just like being in the driver's seat of your own life rather than like letting life happen to you.
I associate it with the common on Twitter phrase, you can just do things. The idea to me always about high agency is like, you're not waiting for permission. You're not sitting around nervous, worrying about the things that might happen if you do it. I'm not sure how much I buy into the framework, but this is the framework.
Yes. I mean, for people who aren't familiar with the idea of being high agency, Max is absolutely right. You may still have seen some of this trickle down into posts that say things like, you can just do things, or when you remember you have free will. That's like all over social media. And I will say, I actually am all for this ethos in my own life. I thought I'd be happier living in New York, so I moved here. I have a habit of asking for things on the off chance that I might get a yes. I take myself on a lot of dates to do things I enjoy, regardless of if anyone else comes with me. But this idea is also popular in the tech world and is kind of a prized trait. Like the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, when asked what the biggest skills were to cultivate in the age of AI, he said,
skills like become high agency, get good at generating ideas, be very resilient.
Which gives me pause. But I think high agency's wider appeal really speaks to some of the anxieties of our time and some of the most existential questions of our lives. Like, do we have control over how our lives will be? And what do we risk when we feel like there's nothing to lose? To get into all that, I am joined by Sophie Hagney, a journalist and critic who wrote about high agency for the New York Times. Hey, Sophie.
Hi.
And Max Reed, a journalist and editor of the Read Max newsletter, where he covers trends, tech, politics, and culture. Great to have you back, Max.
It's great to be here.
Hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. Okay, so to get into it, why is high agency kind of big in the tech world?
I mean, I think in some ways it's like a reframe of a lot of values that have existed in Silicon Valley and adjacent environs for a long time, like move fast and break things, disrupt. These are like terms that have been around for a long time, and I think speak to this culture of, founding companies, dropping out of college. Agency is in some ways just a new formulation of that, but it's a little bit different because it's being treated as like a personality trait or like something to cultivate rather than just like an ethos in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Sophie said, it is a fairly common and like long-standing set of ideals. In this particular instance, I come back to the fact that we've come out of what was a fairly long period of good times in the software industry, especially for workers. The pandemic seems to have really ended that period, and there's been this protracted series of layoffs. It's much harder to find a job. So you get a lot of people sort of inventing this idea of agency as their way of getting out of these big macroeconomic trends that are making it much harder to make money and find work the way they did 10 years ago.
just absorbing all of that for a second. It reminds me of so many other ways on this show that we end up talking about, whether it has to do with how people treat their bodies, how they feed them, how they adorn them, how people think about dating. It just seems like another individual response to big systemic shifts that more people than just you are struggling with.
Yeah, and I do think there's an element of it, maybe thinking outside of tech a little bit. It's a bit of a course correction to some of the ideas that were floating around a lot, maybe like 10 years ago. People used to be talking a lot about how things were structural. Mm-hmm. And I taught a college class last semester, and I was very struck by the absence of a lot of the discourses that were around when I was in college. People were much more focused on like, how can I get ahead in this system that feels rigged against me? And how can I use my sort of individual traits? I mean, a lot of them were using the word agency in their papers, which is how I actually kind of originally got interested in this term.
Really?
I mean, it comes out of politics too. I think I mentioned in the piece, like Donald Trump running for president, no government experience. That's a really high agency move. And so I think there's a reason politically that this is kind of caught on in this moment when people are turning against notions of maybe structural inequality and more towards this like new individualism.
The individualism piece really stands out to me. It kind of reminds me of how some people refer to other people as NPCs or non-playable characters, like in a video game. Like if you're playing Grand Theft Auto, like the type of character that's constantly swaying or would otherwise just walk into a wall if you didn't interact with them. It's like a way that some people describe others to kind of like denote that they have no inner life or dreams or quests of their own. But this idea of agency as a trait, that it's this thing that makes some people like unique in their drive to achieve or overcome or be their best selves. I wonder, like, has its meaning changed from like a more historical, philosophical understanding of what it is? Like the idea of agency, or at least the word, has existed long before people started using it in this way.
The thing that keeps coming back to me with respect to what you're saying, Brittany, is agency in Silicon Valley right now is being used in two similar but sort of divergent ways. And one is this kind of personal agency that we're talking about and being a high agency human being. But one of the things that has taken off in the world of AI over the last year or so has been the idea of agentic AI, so-called AI agents that will go and do work on your computer, on your network, in your email, whatever, without requiring a huge amount of supervision. And I think it's not an accident that agency, the word agency in particular, has become so important to a particular kind of Silicon Valley go-getter at the same time that, agentic AI has risen in the minds of everybody. It has this irony that a lot of social media sort of trends do, where everybody is saying that they're high agency on Twitter. It's like, well, if you're all high agency, are you actually high agency? Like, aren't you just doing what everybody else is doing, which is saying that you're high agency? And so much of this feels like an expression of anxiety, not just about the sort of shifting macroeconomic trends that we were talking about before, but also about the rise of AI and the possibility that the work that you used to be able to do can now be done by an agentic AI. And so there's this kind of funny, I don't know what to say about it except to sort of take the pose of like a therapist and maybe steeple your fingers and say, it's so interesting that you keep saying you're high agency when there are these agentic AIs out there. What is that about? Because I think that's sort of at the heart of what they're responding to.
But I wonder, like, even zooming out from tech, right? Like, it is true that some people believe more in, let's say, an internal locus of control than others, right? Like, meaning some people believe they have more control over their lives than others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I was joking about wanting to tell my son to be high agency, but it does feel like something very important to raising a kid is teaching them that they have a certain amount of control over outcomes in most situations they're in. To me, at least, it feels like a particularly sort of bloodless way to talk about it. It almost cheapens that question of like, where am I in this particular situation that I'm able to overcome something bad that's happening, to make changes in my life, to kind of put it down to this one single quality that, again, is like sharing a vocabulary with AI that is sort of emerging from this intensely hierarchical, like, tech industry where everybody is trying to claim that they're high agency and other people aren't, instead of this locus of control, or just about the ability to rise to an occasion and to understand what you're able to do within and about it. I'm going to make sure he listens to this podcast so he can really get the fullness of this.
Yeah, and I think, like, everyone has agency, and you're not actually stuck in a job most of the time. You're not stuck in a relationship. You're not stuck in a city, even if you feel that way. And even if you don't choose to exercise your agency, I think being aware that you have it is really important and empowering. But I also think it's being now used to supplant a lot of other words. In my piece, I talk about in this kind of like self-helpy essay that really got the word on, I think, a lot of people's maps by this guy, George Mack. He names a lot of people who are high agency, and it's like Elon Musk, a 6-year-old who taught himself investing using YouTube. And then he shows this famous photograph of a crowd where everyone is saluting Hitler except for one guy. And he's like, that guy is really high agency. And like, sure, yes, that guy is exercising control. But I think at a different time, we would have called that courage or bravery. We would have attached some moral valence to that. And I think agency allows us to like circumvent a lot of questions about like, well, what are you using your agency for?
It's very agentic to invade Iran for no particular reason.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that does fit within the framing. We're going to take a quick break. But first, if any of you are finding It's Been a Minute for the first time, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the show and that you come back every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning for brand new episodes. And every Tuesday, a video episode. Tomorrow's video is about why some women are leaving right-wing politics. You can find that video on Spotify or YouTube, or just listen to the audio wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up after the break.
If you want to do like a fully meme-based history of agency, like you could see it as a reaction to the black pill.
Stick around.
It can be hard to keep up with all the new movies on streaming services. How do you tell the good ones worth watching from the bad? Or the silly ones you can laugh along with or at? On NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, we're recommending some fun movies you may have missed. Listen via the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, this idea is spread out a bit from Silicon Valley. Like, I think there's a lot of free will posting on TikTok. I feel like I cannot avoid it. Why do you think this idea is appealing to people outside of the tech world right now?
As you were saying before, Sophie, I think the ironic thing about the fact that you hear more agency talk than structure talk these days is that we are more aware than ever how much structural forces outside of our control are going to create the paths that we go down in life. This is the pandemic. Like, we are still grappling with what the pandemic taught us about how fragile the sort of social bonds that we have are, and how fragile our like wellness and our happiness is, and how much it is at the mercy of forces that we don't really have any control over. And so agency becomes this way to try and reclaim the sense of control that many of us lost and are still sort of trying to understand how to overcome that loss.
That makes me think of, something you said earlier, and also as you mentioned in your piece, Sophie, it could be a backlash to like this 2020 era thinking that really considered the structures in our lives like racism, misogyny, our entire economic system, these systems that boost some people up and keep others down. Like, it's hard to accept that there are forces and systems that might shape your life that you cannot do that much about to change like on your own. I mean, even from my own experience, like, sometimes if you think too much about all of the isms, like if I think too much about it, I could be like, oh, I'm a Black woman, so why even try? I'm not saying this is like a place that I stay 24/7 or even really for a little while, but it can be paralyzing. Like, in my experience, you have to acknowledge it. But thinking about the likelihood and the statistics too much, like, it just can make you crazy. It can make me feel crazy.
If you want to do like a fully meme-based history of agency, like you could see it as a reaction to the black pill, which was the meme of like total cynical nihilism, that, the idea that you take the black pill is when you understand that like nothing matters and everything's going to go bad for you all the time. Just like it's the very like 4chan-y version of I think on the academic left, there's a bunch of discourses of pessimism that have had various levels of influence over the last 10 years, Afro-pessimism, hetero-pessimism, like really fascinating and interesting intellectual discourses that can also, if you take them in a particular way, just lead to like total blackpilling and like inaction, like you're saying, Brittany. And in some ways, agency is like a total natural sort of reaction or response to that in exactly the way you're describing.
I also want to touch on the fact that like the economy can also be a driver of this kind of thinking. I mean, Sophie, you wrote about how it doesn't pay like it used to become a cog, you know, in the company machine and grind it out for a few decades, because a lot of people can't afford a house or a family or other things that you used to be able to have on that kind of like regular salary job, or you really don't end up staying anywhere for a few decades because you could be laid off. I mean, listen, a few of the companies that I used to work at do not exist anymore, okay? Like, not even 40. And the number of people filing likely employer business applications, which are a sign of how many entrepreneurs there are, have gone up in recent years. I can see why some would rather take the risk to start their own businesses rather than work for someone else and never achieve the things they want.
Yeah, definitely. I think pessimism around the traditional economy is a huge driver, maybe especially for like Gen Z, but millennials who kind of want to take back control of their own working lives from what they no longer see as a viable path to like buying a home. Or, I mean, one interesting thing, something said to me, I was in San Francisco when I was working on this, which is where I'm from. And I just happened to see this friend of mine who works in tech, and we were talking about agency. And he said, the most low agency thing you can do with your money is have a 401k. And I was like, whoa. It was this sort of interesting thing where he was kind of making the case that you should be like really putting that money to work. You should be day trading. You should be like thinking about your investments in it. And I honestly don't think I should be doing that. I think that's like something that works for some people and not for other people. But it's this valorization of like really kind of taking huge risks and in some cases really gambling because you feel like the structural forces are against you.
I mean, we have talked about gambling and how much it has shifted our culture since it has become legalized in the way that it's now legalized to do like online from your phone. You used to have to go into a building and be trapped in a big room with no windows where people were smoking and drinking indoors. Okay, you had to know that you were in a casino to gamble, and now you can just do it from home. But even what you're talking about, sort of like the idea of being like high agency with your money and how close of a line that can have to gambling, like I'll come across these ads for gambling apps and they'll frame using them as a side hustle. Like it raises so many questions. Like where is the line between being higher agency and some really potentially harmful, you know, even just to yourself activities?
I mean, I think one thing to consider is that, you know, gambling in and of itself is not a particularly high agency activity because you are putting yourself at the mercy of the game of luck that you're participating in.
I mean, the odds spell it out. The odds spell it out. You're absolutely right.
Part of what's happening in this discourse, in the agency discourse, is that a bunch of people, I mean, I was about to say guys, and I probably just should because I think it's mostly young men, have been sort of hypnotized by the promise of wealth and riches and want to think of themselves as high agency people and are told, come, you know, do your side hustle on Kalshi, without realizing that they're the dumb money. Like those are the guys those are the low agency guys getting herded into prediction markets or wherever else, so that the really, really high agency guys who are the guys who own the casino, that's the highest agency thing you could do, are the ones who are, you know, effectively printing money off of it. Then they would be better off just sort of being like, I'm actually not high agency and I'm just going to live my pretty normal life and have a good time and find joy in that. I mean, I would say it's exhausting being high agency. What Sophie was saying, the idea that I'd have to do something with my retirement money besides put it in an index fund and never ever think about it, like it gives me heart palpitations just now. I have enough to do. I have a 5-year-old. I don't want to do any of the rest of this stuff. So I'm happy to be medium agency, medium low agency.
I am fine with that as well. There's other things that I'd like prefer to be high agency about, like having fun.
Yes.
What about that? I consider myself high agency because I'm like, you know what? I'm always thinking about how can I make myself happier? How can I have more fun? I think it's interesting, though, that this idea is being pushed by all of these tech people when some people might also see high agency thinking as an antidote to getting sucked into the internet, or more generally as an antidote to our frictionless, very convenient times. Like, we just did a series on choosing inconvenience, and I spoke with my colleague over at Life Kit, Margaret Serino, about her choice to stop ordering delivery food through apps several times per week. And she found it really hard, but she's managed to pull it off, and she's saved money, and she's learned how to cook, and she's generally happier. And the idea that you can do hard things yourself like that, you can do things the hard way, that you don't have to rely on tech products, that is also very high agency. I wonder, what do you make of that interpretation of high agency?
Yeah, I think that's a really amazing vision of agency. I think one example that one of my students gave me was, if your button falls off your shirt, do you sew it back on yourself? It's high agency to sew the button back on. That's a really old-fashioned vision of resourcefulness and self-sufficiency. And I totally endorse that, especially if it means learning a new skill like cooking. I like visions of agency that kind of emphasize resourcefulness and learning things and kind of working against the forces of society, like many of these tech products that are actually making us much more passive consumers.
I think too, there's speaking of convenience, part of what agency is responding to is the kind of infinity of choice that we've been afforded by so many apps over the years. And that the part of agency that's about decisiveness is really appealing in a world where, how many times, maybe I'm telling on myself here, how many times have you sat down to watch something on TV and spent 40 minutes just scrolling through Netflix or whatever? And this is a very low, version of high agency, but just picking a freaking movie and just watching it is very high agency in that context. As Sophie says, though, like agency, like any other quality, has two sides. And decisiveness is great when the decisions are good and maybe less so when invading sovereign countries.
Thank you both so much. I appreciate you using your agency to come on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fun.
That was Sophie Hagney, journalist and critic who wrote about high agency for the New York Times, and Max Reed, a journalist and editor of the Read Max newsletter. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
Engineering support came from
Zoe Vangenhoven.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Our supervising producer is
Cher Vincent.
Our executive producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
We flush a lot of things down the toilet. The obvious ones. But drugs like cocaine are also going down the drain and into our waterways. That's changing the animals that live in it.
It's definitely present in most ecosystems on Earth now, unfortunately. We're only sort of really starting to scratch the surface into understanding the potential consequences of that.
Forget Cocaine Bear. Learn about cocaine salmon on Shortwave, in the NPR app, or wherever you get your podcasts.